I'm Catherine Jollick. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of History here at Stanford, and I'm also the coordinator of the Public History Public Service track. I'm actually a specialist on modern East European history, and I want to share with you a quote that has stuck with me for decades. And it comes from a Polish journalist who said, "When Americans say it's history, they mean it doesn't matter. For us, it's the exact opposite." And I think that has long been true, and maybe is true for a large portion of the American population. But I've really been struck through teaching a course called Doing Public History, just watching political and cultural developments over the past couple of decades, and certainly learning from all of you about the kind of work you're doing in local communities, with how profoundly that sense of history is changing for Americans. You know, I think there's a much greater appreciation of the importance of history for the average American today. Certainly, you know, tearing down monuments or renaming streets and buildings was unimaginable just when I was an undergraduate, and now, you know, we're reading about it on a daily basis. And I think part of the challenge in learning about the complexities and the untold aspects of historical changes, and certainly of revising master narratives, is paying attention to the sources of individuals and organizations that were either overlooked or not deemed important enough to be included. So we really need people to have the foresight to preserve and to prioritize the documents and the voices of individuals and groups who have fought for social justice. And I really believe that also documenting those sources is its own form of activism. And so I'm really pleased to be able to welcome you to this afternoon session called Documenting Activism. And I would like to thank you for joining us, and particularly thank our three speakers who are here today to share their experience both as activists in their communities, but also in documenting that activism in the San Francisco Bay Area. And in order to introduce the speakers, I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, Drew Bourne, who's the historical curator at the Stanford Medical History Center.
I'm Drew Bourne. I oversee the Medical History Center, which is the Archives and Rare Books collection at Stanford Medicine, and I've been delighted to have the chance to co-chair this with Dr. Jollick. And I'm delighted also to welcome our three speakers here today. And the focus of the discussion, what they'll be talking about, is thinking about what it means to document activism. How do you do it in a way that is effective? How do you do it in a way that is responsible? What are the ways in which sometimes documentation is itself a form of activism, as Catherine was mentioning? So I'm going to say just a couple of words about each of our three speakers in the order in which they'll be speaking. They'll give a presentation, and then we'll have a little bit of time afterwards for question and answer or discussion with microphones. So our first speaker will be Dr. Micah Lubensky, who is a social psychologist who has spent nearly a decade as the community mobilization manager at the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, co-leading the Black Brothers Esteem program. There, Micah designed and implemented a Black LGBTQ+ history celebration in collaboration with program participants. That celebration grew and evolved into the Generations Black LGBTIQQ History event, whose Bay Area-wide planning committee Micah chaired or co-chaired for 7 years. He is currently the participant engagement director at the PRIDE study, the first national longitudinal study of LGBTQ+ holistic health. Our second speaker is Jim Eagle, who has been a volunteer board member for the Bay Area American Indian Two-Spirits for 12 years. He has been a grant writer, event fundraiser, regalia maker, and powwow co-chair. He's also served on the boards of several other Bay Area nonprofits and is a member of the Sisseton Wapana Oyate, a Dakota Sioux tribe. Our third speaker today will be Nathaniel Moore, who has been an activist and educator at the Freedom Archives in San Francisco since 2012, where he has also served as co-director since 2020. His graduate training was in African Studies and African American Studies, and he holds a master's degree in Library and Information Science. He is an archivist at the UC Berkeley Ethnic Studies Library, and his projects have included prisoner support work and other areas of political organizing. So please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Dr. Micah Lubensky.
My name is Micah Lubensky. I use pronouns he, him, his, and I'm the Participant Engagement Director with the PRIDE study in PRIDEnet, which is based at Stanford University School of Medicine and also UC San Francisco. Dr. Vincent Foucault uses pronouns he, him, his. He's the Health Program Coordinator in the Office of Health Equity and Community Health Equity and Promotion at the San Francisco Department of Public Health. I am biracial, African American and Jewish, but I strongly identify with my African American ancestry. And Vincent is African American as well, and both of us are members of the Black LGBTQ community. And we acknowledge that our employers and our community are located in an unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. So this presentation is about the Generations Black LGBTIQQ History Experiences event, and it would not have been possible without these people, and I'd like to make sure that I have them up here, including the names of the biography subcommittee. So this presentation is about a community event called Generations Black LGBTIQQ History Experiences, which has been centered on teaching Black LGBTIQQ history, supporting wellness, and nurturing Black LGBTIQQ leaders. The birth and the development of this event have been manifestations of activism, and I will be unfolding all of that for you here. I'll start with the social context for how this event came into be and give an overview of what happens at the event. And then from there, I'll make crystal clear how our event for sharing community history is activism in itself. I'll share some of the ethical challenges we face, and I'll share how we invite support from members outside the community. And so a few notes just in general. We use Black African American, Black African American, African diasporic interchangeably. And then I also may use LGBTIQQ, LGBTQ+, and LGBT interchangeably, just so we're all on the same page. I need to start with context for why this event even began. And so without going into any depth at all, to begin, I presume, and I hope, that you can understand or can imagine that Black LGBTIQQ people face multiple forms of stigma. And those forms of stigma intersect: racism, cis-heterosexism, classism, and so forth. These forms of stigma crystallize in many ways in San Francisco specifically. We have a horrible gentrification problem in San Francisco, like you do here in the Silicon Valley and the South Bay. San Francisco population is almost 875,000 people. African Americans are only 5.2% of the population, and that's dropped 36% in 20 years. The San Francisco median single-family home price is $1.75 million, and the median income for Black households in San Francisco is $29,000. San Francisco is one of the most expensive cities to live in the United States. Of those of you who live in the South Bay are quite familiar with those costs. And thus far, most urban renewal policies have only undermined and disintegrated Black neighborhoods further. And the result is that many members of San Francisco's Black LGBTIQQ community are very isolated. Stigma takes forms in other ways as well. Infection rates and mortality from diseases and illnesses like HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. Data from San Francisco of HIV diagnoses and age-adjusted mortality tells us that Black men have the highest rates of HIV infection among all racial ethnic groups of men. Black men's rates of new HIV infections show the slowest decline among all racial and ethnic groups. Black women have the highest rates of HIV infection among all racial and ethnic groups. And Black trans women comprise the largest percentage of those who are underdiagnosed for HIV. And by the way, public health research demonstrates that one of the largest contributors to rates is isolation, not individual risk behavior. So this should be very clear about this is not about individual risk behavior. And because of these population numbers, the easiest way to get funding to intervene and to support Black LGBTIQQ community is by doing public health work. So another lens of stigma impacting Black LGBTQ people is that LGBTQ history is not widely taught for many reasons that mirror the structural stigma I mentioned earlier: racism, cis-heterosexism, classism. So stories about Black LGBTQ plus greatness, leadership, trailblazers are rarely elevated, if ever. And despite the fact that various advocacy and educational groups promote teaching Black LGBTQ plus history, because teaching that history helps teach individual and collective worthiness, which is important for supporting health education. So on to intervening. Okay, public health funders often require models to guide and or legitimate the work you want to do and strategies for how you want to do it in the community. And so a strong model in health psychology world is the biopsychosocial model, which talks about success and well-being is impacted by biology, psychology, and social contexts. So if you want to support Black LGBTQ plus community health, think about how to do it at this intersection of biology, psychology, and social context. And this is the context in which we think about the interventions in supporting wellness. And so just to focus and to zone in on one angle of that specifically, we know that mental health maintenance and self-esteem are bound together, all right? And if you can increase mental health, if you can increase self-esteem, you can increase and improve physical health outcomes. And we also know that if you can increase an individual's collective self-esteem, that is how an individual values their membership in their own community identity, it can also improve individual and community physical health outcomes. Okay, so on to the interventions. I used to work, as Drew mentioned, for almost 10 years. I worked at the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, and I was a community mobilization manager for a program called Black Brothers Esteem, which is an HIV prevention program for Black, gay, bisexual, same-gender loving, and gender minority people. And the biopsychosocial model regularly featured in our program's efforts to think holistically about preventing the spread of HIV. Program participants wanted to celebrate Black LGBT history in February. Celebrate Black LGBT history in February. Revolutionary, right? Because Black History Month, February, rarely features Black LGBT people. And there is an LGBT History Month, but that rarely features Black LGBT people, right? So they're like, let's do Black history with Black LGBT people in February. And so the program participants and I collaborated to create an event just for the program in 2010. I had previously collected a small archive of Black LGBT biographies, and so that was in my back pocket already, and that initiated and sparked its perpetual expansion from that point on. So that event was a huge success. The Black Brothers Esteem program, BBE, requested to make it bigger and open it to the public, make it more accessible to, so the impact is much more expansive. And so program participants recommended that we collaborate with the health department and other community-based organizations who serve Black community in San Francisco Bay Area. And so we formed a planning committee that we fundraised, produced, and programmed events from 2011 through 2020, okay? And that planning committee, what we did, we fundraised, we organized, we produced venue, publicity, health screenings, specifically around sexually transmitted infections, plus raffle prizes, because you need to give people, sometimes give them a little extra incentive to take an STD test. Bountiful, culturally appropriate food. We're talking soul food, okay? Don't ask Black people to come to an event if you're not going to offer some soul food. But also offer healthy options too, because not everything has to be deep fried. And then entertainment as well. There was a subcommittee that focused specifically on biographies, on expanding the biographies we had in the archives so it grew every year and then making them interactive. We'll talk about that in a second. And we also did awards programming, where we put out a call to the community. Who should we be giving awards to that's working in the community now, in the LGBTQ community, that needs to be recognized and identified? And we did a call for that, and then we vetted those and then chose who the award winners would be. And then there's also featured significant sponsorship at the San Francisco Department of Public Health, which is revolutionary, because many health departments won't do that. Lots of staff time, lots of financial resources. So what happens at the event? What happens at this history event? So there's two aspects to the program. There's something that happens throughout the entire night, and that's just, there's food always available, abundant food, right? There's also an archive of Black LGBTIQQ biographies that is accessible out in folders, at tables. People can fold if I walk through. There's also an art gallery by local Black LGBTQ artists. We offer health screens by culturally competent providers in the community, usually staffed by Black people themselves, usually Black LGBTQ people or their allies. And then we also have community service organizations who do outreach, and only if they're sponsors. And then we also have a sequential program at the event that happens where people, if they want to be more passive an audience member, we have a sequential program with a welcome, where I actually give the context for why we even do this event, why it's important to connect knowledge of Black LGBT history to our community wellness. There's entertainment featuring only Black LGBTQ entertainers. There's interactive biographies, where we have the biographies from the archive being read by audience members. Whether it be on screen or beneath their seats, they pull them out and have a microphone and read the biography to the audience. We do raffle prizes, where we give, that's the extra incentive for people doing testing. Everyone gets a raffle prize when they walk in the door, but then you also get an extra raffle ticket for every test you take. So no one knows if you took a test or not, because everyone got one at the door. But the more tests you take, the more raffle tickets you get. So we do multiple raffle drawings. We do the community awards. We do more entertainment. We do more biographies. And then we have an evaluation for 3 years. And so the biography archive, let me take a second to walk you through what is in this biography archive. So as it stands now, the biography archive celebrates 303 significant African diasporic LGBTIQQ leaders. And when I say historically significant, these are folks, it's hard for me to describe this as a non-historian. I'm a social psychologist, so I don't know how to use it in the language you all use as historians and archivists, but I think of it as historical folks who are no longer with us in this dimension, and people who are contemporary, who are still alive and still making history. So they include both historical and contemporary leaders across 13 domains. And those 13 domains are here for you on the screen. Just, we don't focus only on sports, or focus only on, community organizing. We also have business and fashion. We have writers. We have politics and policy. We have scientists. We have visual artists. We have health and medicine. So these are the folks. And this number of 303 is growing regularly. So who are some examples of who are in some of these domains? So for instance, the community organizing service and activism, I just took a walk through it to myself to see who's in it. And we have examples of the historical and the contemporary folks. And we have historical international leaders, such as Bayard Rustin, who may be the one Black LGBT person who's featured in Black History Month, who's a LGBT himself, as well as Marsha P. Johnson, who was an important part of the Stonewall Uprising. We have historical local leaders like Carl Knapper and Ron Simmons from Washington, D.C., and contemporary international leaders like Angela Davis, Miss Major, Phil Wilson, and then Frank Mugisha. And they have contemporary local leaders like Joe Hawkins and Valerie Wagner in Los Angeles and Ernest Andrews. So in terms of politics and policy, we have, there's 36 folks there, and historical and as well as contemporary. And we'll get back to this in a second, but I include Alexander Hamilton. Some of you may know there's dialogue about whether or not he was multiracial, right? And also the Pharaoh Hatshepsut, and Queen Calafia. Historical local leaders like Lawana Mayfield, and then contemporary international leaders like Zakiele Mbele, who's from South Africa, and contemporary local leaders like Park Cannon. So the archive, like I mentioned, it's out in the entire event. It's out in the open space. There's a reading station, and we project photos over it so it draws people to it. It's not like something in the corner where there's dust maybe possibly sitting. There's actually photos. You can see actually the first black gay Major League Baseball player who invented the high five. Is projected. He invented the high five, really. He's projected behind Jackie right there on the screen. And we also have, in the entertainment program, we have biographies read from the stage, we have the biographies projected, and we also have the interactive biographies read by members who they may reach beneath the seat and find a biography to read. So then the awards, we feature local leaders who are receiving awards, and past winners have included everyone from Billy Cooper, who's a major organizer amongst the Black trans women's community in San Francisco, to Dr. Hyman Scott, who works at the San Francisco Department of Public Health. So we've done some evaluation data, which is really important for those of us who work in public health. We need to have numbers. What is the impact, right? And so this evaluation subcommittee was always volunteer, so we were limited in what we were able to accomplish. And we did it only for 4 years, but we were able to measure community acceptance, community impact in terms of health, self-esteem, community adhesion, the event growth. We wrote reports up from this data and shared that with our funders every year from all the fundraising we did. And then we always presented that back to the community for dissemination to let the community members know the impact of the event that they're going to and participating. Thank you. I have lots of data about that. I'm only going to show just basically, there's lots of data about that. These are 5-point scales. These are averages on 5-point scales, but essentially like the top line, attending this event made me proud of who I am. Out of a 5-point scale where 5 is strongly agree and a 1-point scale is strongly disagree, you can see that it's quite high in average across the different participants who responded to that. We also have qualitative data too, like by attending the event, what did you learn? Did you learn anything new about the Black LGBTQ community? And qualitative answers are, community, visibility, and diversity. We are amazing and diverse in so many ways. There are many leaders in this community that are not visible in mainstream American culture. So telling community history is activism. A lot of what I've told you has already demonstrated that. But let me just drive that home for a second, right? So raising consciousness about Black LGBTQ history and excellence and trailblazers nurtures and motivates the whole Black LGBTQ plus community, including our current and future leaders. We need every leader to be as strong and motivated to keep doing this because with all the different intersecting forms of stigma that we face in our community, it's important that they stay as motivated as possible. We also need every leader as possible, so this inspires new leaders, the next phase of leaders. By raising consciousness, we're also raising individual and collective self-esteem. And by convening the event, we're reducing isolation and having us all get together to have these celebrations, and also with culturally competent people who are providing resources for health services and screenings. These are all needed for improving physical health outcomes. Another reason why community history is activism is Black people in the United States often face racism and classism in medical institutions. Additionally, many Black community members are very familiar with the histories of abuse or neglect by these institutions. Very commonly, people know about the Tuskegee study, also the stealing of the cells of Henrietta Lacks. But there's a lot of Black community who know about these and the different forms of abuse that Black people have experienced at the hands of medical institutions and medical research centers. This is true in San Francisco too, no different, where many Black LGBT people are wary of going to medical providers and institutions. So Black LGBTQ community ends up relying more on community service organizations to get their needs met, which are funded by public health dollars. And unfortunately, public health departments are failing us in most cases because they rarely fund programs like this in San Francisco. We're lucky that San Francisco Department of Public Health is a major funder of this, but they only fund so many events like this. This is not a regular thing. They don't fund lots of these events in San Francisco. So creating this event is a form of activism where we're offering culturally competent health screens and holistic setting to elevate Black LGBTQ greatness and trailblazers, to raise collective self-esteem. And then raising consciousness about Black LGBTQ greatness is activism because our educational institutions are also failing us by not teaching us our own history, intentionally erasing it. So what are the sticky points? There's a few I'll mention. Current and historical understandings of identity. What is the current versus historical understanding of sexual orientation, of gender identity, of gender expression, and of race? As a biracial person right now, I can tell you my experience of identifying with race, of gender expression, gender identity, sexual orientation, may be very different from someone 60 years ago, let alone going back to the first potentially transgender pharaoh, right? So whether or not evidence is available, debatable, can we project identity as onto those who are no longer living? And there are also complexities that many of you historians and archivists understand. Why is the historical record limited? Why do some people, scholars or not, resist claims for people being eligible to be included in the Black LGBTQ community? Thank you. And then, of course, ethical challenges like in terms of advocating for funding to do something that's holistic, not just based on limited dollars for testing for HIV. So how can people support generations from outside the community? Well, make it rain, right? Fund public health and public education initiatives, focus on serving Black LGBTQ community health and education. Fund members of the community to do this work. Subsidize culturally competent research assistants to help develop and maintain the biography archive. And then help promote generations when it returns in 2023. There's our Facebook page. And help replicate generations where available. You can see I presented about this at the 2014 NASM conference in Florida and at the International AIDS Conference 2016. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Jim Eagle, and I am the current chair of Bates. Jim Eagle Makiyapido. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I am also an enrolled member of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate of the Dakota people of the Sioux Nation. So I was born in South Dakota. I am also a child of adoption, having been taken away from the reservation prior to 1972, or the ICWA Act of 1972, which stopped those adoptions. But I was born prior to that, so I was adopted out. Just real quickly, in 1952, the federal government created the Urban Relocation Program, which encouraged American Indians to move off the reservation into such cities as Chicago, Denver, and Los Angeles. They were lured by the hope of a better life, but for many, the promise was not realized. That was taken from an NPR article back in January 7th, 2012. In case you didn't know that, there was in 1952, again, there was a relocation program. It wasn't everything they hoped to be, as they lured Indians from the Native Americans from the reservations into these big cities with the promise of jobs and support for months on end. And it turned out when they actually did get to those cities, they only gave them about a month of support, and then you're on your own. That's why, in case you're ever wondering, so many Native Americans actually end up in cities is because of that program. Since there were many natives in major cities after this program happened, natives now needed organizations and communities in order to feel in touch with their culture and their people. And of course, Two-Spirits would come along with that relocation and be the progeny of those who were relocated. Bates, or the Bay Area American Indian Two-Spirit Society, was created back in 1999 and exists to restore and recover the role of Two-Spirit people within the American Indian First Nations community by creating a forum for the spiritual, cultural, and artistic expression of Two-Spirit people. That's basically our mission statement. Two-Spirit is a term that was created in the early 90s at a conference of LGBTQ Native Americans conference in Canada. Two-Spirit refers to the commonly shared notion among many Native American tribes that some individuals naturally possessed and manifested both a masculine and feminine spiritual qualities. American society commonly identifies Two-Spirit people as LGBTQ. Two-Spirits have always, but Two-Spirits, there's a big difference, or a small difference. Two-Spirits don't see it that way, but it's a small difference. Two-Spirits have always existed, but were written out of existence during colonization. There are many terms for Two-Spirit people, and each tribe had its own term. And this is a short video clip of that term. It's a nice little explanation about Two-Spirit identity, pre-colonial, and then what happened after colonization. Ready? Here we go.
Distinct ones. Each nation had different words for Two-Spirit people and revered them as community members who could take on both masculine and feminine roles. They were gifted, able to restore balance to their communities as mediators, healers, and guides. And then came colonization. Churches and government-run boarding schools not only prohibited indigenous cultural expression, they actively drove home the idea that any form of gender nonconformity is an absolute sin. Two-Spirit people were forced to trim themselves down to just one Western gender identity, man or woman.
All right, so like most social movements, there it is. Like most social movements, takes a second to come back. Two-Spirit organizations were only interested in fulfilling their missions. As with Bates, we were only interested in doing what we were, our mission statement I had said earlier, we had proclaimed, it was to kind of recapture some of the culture that we had lost. We originally only wanted recognition of past existence and current visibility. And then as time progressed, Two-Spirits began developing their own modern paths. So documenting the progression of our path was not the goal, but it started to take on its own existence as we gained in recognition and our roles and memberships increased. In the late 90s and early 2000s, Bates had pamphlets, buttons, posters, and postcards produced like most organizations did in order to market themselves and call attention to protests. Some of those were also produced in collaborations with other Native organizations in order to promote health programs that dealt specifically with HIV, mental illness, holistic and spiritual outreach. For Bates, it was specifically the Native American Health Center. We would collaborate on a lot of things. As Bates grew in the 2000s, we were asked by the Pride Committee of San Francisco in 2001 to open the Pride Parade with a prayer and have done so every year since. We were also asked recently to open the Dyke March for the last several years and the Trans March, the new Trans March, with a prayer as well. What is interesting is, although Bates did not pursue documentation of all these events, people started to ask us if they could. We've had several documentaries done, news articles from LGBTQ magazines and newspapers done on our organization. There's also documentaries about Two-Spirits that included Bates video footage from our powwow, so other Two-Spirit documentaries were done, but they tend to use a lot of our footage as well. Bates created the very first Two-Spirit powwow in the nation, in case you didn't know. Now, there were Two-Spirit conferences and gatherings prior to that, but no powwows were done until 2012. And it was one of our board members at the time who suggested it because of something she witnessed, and it left a terrible mark on her conscience. And I'll let you tell her story. Hopefully this comes up. This is her story, and this is why the thing happened.
I saw an incident that happened at a powwow here in the Bay Area. There was a transgendered Native woman who, by some people's standards, were not very passable, but I thought she still looked very beautiful. And she was out in the arena dancing, and one of the MCs called her out in front of everybody, literally stopped the powwow and said, "You need to leave, you're being disrespectful. You know, you're a man, it's obvious you're dressed in women's regalia, get out right now." And it was really sad. That woman left the community and never came back.
So that was the incident she had witnessed. She came back to the board several months later, because she was a board member, and said, let's have a powwow. And she said, she'd realized we need a safe space because otherwise we get kicked out, right? So we had never done a powwow before. We'd been to many, but we'd never done any before. So now that we haven't done one anymore, hold on, there it is. We realized the challenges that we didn't realize, all the challenges that were going to come. One of those challenges was asking ourselves what we wanted it to be. If you're familiar of how a powwow works, then you know the dances and the protocols are very gender specific. There are dances for men only, and there are dances for women only. At that time, only men were supposed to do the drumming as well. It's considered a very sacred duty, and it's to be taken very seriously. So we had some obstacles to overcome. The very first Bates Powwow Committee had decided to degender all the dance categories. So if a male-identifying person wanted to dance in the jingle dress competition, which is typically a female-only dance, then it was okay for that person to sign up, put on the corresponding regalia, and compete. Or if a women-identifying person wanted to dance in the grass dance competition, which is typically a male one, then it's now okay for that person to sign up, put on the regalia, and dance and compete for that. That's one of the changes we decided to make. Now, Bates had a drum made for our group as well. Like I said earlier, only men were known for doing drumming. It was commissioned, created, and it was blessed after receiving it. Bates put out a call to their membership for anybody who's interested in learning how to drum and sing. Many people showed up to the class, including myself, but in a few months, only the women remained. For some reason, all the men dropped out. So it became a women's drum group, and it was the first women's drum group. Now, I mentioned earlier that powwows only have men's drumming groups, so in the beginning, when our women drummers showed up at other powwows, they were attempting to go and travel to other powwows that were local in the Bay Area. They were rejected for a few times. There were people, their MCs or the arena directors said, "No, you can't do it here, sorry." But over a few years, they became more and more accepted among the Bay Area powwow scene. Now they are well known and have their own schedule, and they play at various venues and gatherings, including our own Two-Spirit powwow. They have also had a short documentary done on their experiences as well, and you can still find it on YouTube if you're looking for it. Here's a quick clip on theirs.
Even though many gay people sit at Southern Pride, they still follow a family tradition that says women don't sit at their drum. We don't want to be disrespectful to them and argue about what's traditional or not. That is their tradition. But we had a lot more women's drum groups, so that's controversial.
For even me to see the women's drum is something unique and to me new. Redefining what is one's place at these powwows, Bates again drives that question into people's minds.
Being a woman who sits at a drum sometimes, I do know that we feel that we're blessed to have an actual drum that we can sit at.
One of the most active programs for Bates is the Bates drum. It's been a learning experience and we've come a long way. We were a little scared to even come out to the powwow, but we're really happy to share some songs. And we're especially there for Two-Spirit people and their allies. And we've had some wonderful teachers, including Phoenix. We gather twice a month.
All right, so a quick clip about that. All right. One more note about the Two-Spirit Powwow was getting other drum groups and dancers to come. So that's what you normally do. You have other dancers come from around the country and other drum groups to come. There were a few rejections in the beginning from other drum groups and dancers who didn't think it was appropriate, traditional, or morally acceptable for them to do it. But the majority of people that we did ask did respond enthusiastically, and they did come. They did come. Originally, we thought we'd only have about 100 people show up that day, and the very first one, which was held at the LGBT Center in San Francisco on Market Street. But we ended up having about 500 people come that day. 12 years later, we now do it at Fort Mason Center, and we have about 4,000 to 5,000 people who show up in one day. We have about 50 dancers who compete, and we have about 4 or 5 drum groups who come throughout the day. We do give away prize money for winners of the dance competitions. So. Here's a quick clip as well. Hopefully we're doing on time.
In the powwow world that we live in today, this is how we do it. We have what's called a grand entry. We're grand. We want everybody to see us in our regalia. We also have the staffs and the flags behind the staffs. Those have meanings to us. They're very sacred.
At the grand entry, when all of our flags are going in along with our eagle staffs, you'll also see the rainbow flag. The rainbow flag is very important to us, the Two-Spirit Committee, because it reflects who we are.
Again, we ask that you stand in honor of the staffs that are coming to the arena and the flags.
For some people, it was actually very emotional. It's a big thing because it means that we're a part of the whole, we're a part of this community. And so there's a pride that a lot of people felt, especially when they saw for the first time that gay flag going in.
Bring them in the arena.
Start it there, yeah. So again, yeah, it's kind of what's interesting about that is that now at major other powwows, I don't want to say heterosexual powwows, but other powwows like Gathering of Nations in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's a huge powwow they just had it last month. The pride flag is included along with the American flag and the veterans flag and all the other flags and the tribal flags. The pride flag is also included in that. So. Let's see. In 2018, we were asked by the GLBT Historical Society in San Francisco to produce an exhibit. We had 3 of our board members work on that project. It premiered in January 31st, 2019, and ran through May of 2019, that same year. Bates contributed various items for this documentation, including posters, buttons, ribbons, textiles, and artworks. There was also some photography and video loans as well, and it's now part of their permanent archive. So you can actually go there and review it if you ever wanted to, And occasionally they bring it back. Bates is an all-volunteer organization. We don't have contracts with major corporations, municipalities, or government agencies. We exist on donations, grants, and volunteers. We have held fundraisers and delivered our message through many drag shows and potlucks. Yes, many drag shows and bars, gay bars. We are not above taking your beer money. Yeah, Drew knows that. We have used an online store for our Bates powwow merch. We have used YouTube to deliver culture and traditions to Two-Spirits in remote parts of the country and sometimes in remote parts of the world. We have had storytelling events, and we have given our members powwow dance and regalia making lessons. We have provided online talking circles via the internet for Two-Spirits on reservations for those who don't have a good support system on their particular reservation. That is changing too. Since our first Two-Spirit powwow, others have popped up at universities, cities, and reservations. Now there are several throughout the whole country, boom, including here in the U.S. and Canada. So since our powwow done. Because we do get calls, say, "Hi, how did you do that? How did you manage that powwow?" It is a lot of work. And to finish off, I just want to say, in my Dakota language, there is a term, it's called Mitakue Oyasin, and it means all my relations. And today, that is all of you. I am proud to be here talking with you, Mitakue Oyasin. Thank you. I just want to finish up with a real quick clip to prove that I do go to this powwow. I've never done it before. I was kind of nervous. I started dancing. Yes, that was from our last one in February. So. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
My name is Nathaniel. I use he, him pronouns. I want to say thank you to Stanford for putting this on and inviting us, and also to my other two fellow presenters who really appreciate your presentations and bringing that energy into the space. So I'll do what I can to keep that going, and I'm going to try to err on the side of shortness so that hopefully there can be some conversation and questions at the end. So I'll do my best to try to make that happen. All right. So today I'm here representing the Freedom Archives, which is a social movement archive that's located in Berkeley, California. We were in San Francisco for 21 years and then just recently moved to Berkeley. So we're settling into our new home there. Let's see here. Great. Okay, so this is the logo of the Freedom Archives, and our motto is preserve the past, illuminate the present, and shape the future. And as I go through this presentation, that'll kind of be the compass that I use to talk about the work that we do. So let's see here. So you can read this if you want, but I'm going to basically say a lot of this. This is kind of the word version, the short word version of who we are. But maybe before I get to some of that stuff, I'll talk a little bit about how the content that we hold actually came to be. So as I'm sure most of you in the room are aware, in the 1960s and 70s, the Bay Area was a real epicenter and focal point for social movements of all kinds. And so during that period of time, there were a number of folks that were doing progressive journalism in the Bay Area, a lot of whom were connected to the radio station KPFA, but also doing work at other radio stations as well. And and so this work included, being on the ground at different protests and mobilizations, interviewing different organizers and activists, just doing weekly news programs, having cultural montages of radical poetry and music, all the things that you can think could possibly be broadcasted on the radio, they were involved in doing these things. And while their work was valued to the extent that the radio station did allow them to do it, it wasn't really valued so much past that. But the folks who were actually doing the work had an incredible amount of foresight and decided to save the vast majority of the radio programs that they in fact recorded to save them, not with any necessarily idea of mood lighting, all right. That's what's up. Not to necessarily that they knew what they were going to do with them necessarily, but knowing that the people that they were talking to, the events that they were covering, and that the work that they were engaged in was certainly of value. And so they held on to these materials. So fast forward to about 1999, 2000, all these folks had done various different things in the last 30-some years of their lives. But they were instigated to come together, and then those audio recordings that they had held on to since the 60s and 70s, that became the first iteration of the Freedom Archives. So a lot of those folks are still involved in the organization today, which is a really wonderful historical continuity. And a lot of the scope of their materials still kind of sets the tone for the work that we do today. Although obviously at this point, 22 years later, we've grown substantially, and the actual work that we do looks a little bit different than just preservation, of which I'll talk about now. But yeah, we'll stick here. So I'm going to go through the motto, right? And that'll kind of describe the work that we do. So preserve the past. So we're an archive, right? So we literally engage in the archival work of preserving social movement materials. We mainly focus on the 1960s to the 1990s. So that could be audio tapes, it could be videotapes, and in the past, maybe 5 to 7 years, a lot of different paper materials. So that would cover again, a huge amount of social movements, but some of the ones that we are really proud to focus on and have pretty robust holdings around, the prisoner movement, Black liberation, the Puerto Rican independence struggle, the war against Vietnam, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And for kind of more of a comprehensive engagement of our materials, I encourage everyone to take a look at our website, www.freedomarchives.org, and I'll mention our search site in a second, of which you can actually engage with all these materials. So, we're an archive, right? Illuminate the present. The thing about us that makes us a little bit of a different kind of archive, though, is we don't just want to preserve the past and hold it in some kind of static setting with the hope that people who find it important stumble upon us and engage it. We want to actively put that stuff out there in the world and use it to help our communities and our movements better understand their positionality, and especially for someone like myself who is not alive in the 1960s and 70s, how do I actually fit into this history as someone who wasn't a part of it? And so the way that we do that is we always try to create and use educational resources made from our archival holdings to help us understand both the continuity between the issues and the topics of the 1960s and 70s and 80s and 90s and how they play out today, and also to kind of help open up the idea that people today are history, just not yet. Right? So the same work that folks that were doing in the 60s and 70s felt that was just their day-to-day living. And now we look at that as, oh my gosh, there's so much learnings and rich fabric, right? That's us, but just 30 years in the future. And so especially for young people who are oftentimes trained to hate history through a lot of things that, whether it be the institutional way that people engage history, or whether that be concerted efforts by right-wing forces and governments to subjugate our histories, or like Jim mentioned, the colonial dynamic of paving over people's nuanced histories to create binaries, right? So a million different reasons, but we really want to encourage young people to engage history in the most nuanced and robust and wide way so that they can continue the work that was started many, many generations. Like all of us are standing on the work of the people who came before us, right? So young people today are doing the same. I'm doing the same. Folks in the 60s and 70s, again, doing the same. So whether that be having a searchable database where people can actually engage the materials by looking at scans of certain things or listening to audio recordings, or whether that be us creating educational resources as big as full-length documentaries or as small as maybe just kind of like an interactive curriculum, but constantly this idea of what is held in the archives is not static, it's actually dynamic, and constantly trying to get that out into the world so that people can actually engage it. And then there's Shape the Future, right? And so I mentioned a little bit of it in terms of our work with young people, but ultimately the idea is I would prefer, hopefully during my lifetime, but maybe not, but certainly during the next generation's lifetime, if all of these issues that were seemingly so embedded in our society, maybe we wouldn't have to actually deal with those things. That would be a novel notion. And so this idea of how can we actively support people who are doing the work today to challenge these systems and to engage in organizing their communities, how can we use the holdings in the archives to stimulate this? And so one of the ways we do that is by we have an internship program where young people come in and not only learn how to do archival work, but also are able to actually engage with the archives and create their own projects using archival materials, but using them that speak to their own lives and settings, which again make them feel and understand that history is not this static thing that they just learn about in school that's not them. In fact, they are history. And so, in fact, you can use these materials to do whatever you want with them and make them relevant to your lives and use them to help speak to the challenges and the situations that you find yourself in. That's not to say that that things are not the same, or that's not to say that the issues that we face today and the dynamics in our world are the same as the 1960s through the 90s. They're not, right? But in fact, the legacy of resistance that flows through those materials and that energy that motivates people to make sacrifices and to engage the world in an active way to challenge these things, that is still relevant. And so by allowing young people to create their own projects and just kind of run wild with the archives, we're able to create not just strong communities, but communities that are grounded in not just the past, but also with imagining and shaping their future. So we're really proud of that work. And always we're trying to focus on empowerment and, again, drawing connections between things that happened in the past and today. So one of the things that is a good example of that is I always, when I do these presentations, try to find something from the archives that speaks to whatever we're talking about. And I was able to find a clip actually done by a Stanford professor, and I'll speak to who this person is in a moment, that'll, even though he's not talking about the Freedom Archives at all, so I want to make that very clear, Freedom Archives did not exist when he said this, but when you listen to what he's saying, a lot of what he says, the energy that I just represented in what I'm talking about, you'll hear it. And so that really, again, shows that we see ourselves in a larger legacy of resistance and that standing on the work that people have already done and trying to further it. And so Fernando Alegria was a renowned Chilean writer, poet, and a professor at Stanford. He was a cultural attaché to the U.S. under the Chilean president Salvador Allende before he was overthrown in the U.S.-sponsored coup. And he founded a famous literary magazine, and as the screen says, he was described as the intellectual face of the opposition to the regime. So I just want to take a quick minute here and let him speak for himself. And the recording that I'm going to play was recorded in September of 1973. That's the volume.
American students. I was in Santa Barbara a couple of days ago, and I was looking at these young American students. We were outdoors, and Kenneth Rexroth was speaking very nobly about Neruda and the significance of Neruda's poetry and life to people all over the world. And I told them that Neruda would have been very happy to be there. As a matter of fact, I thought Neruda was there at that moment, because I remember Neruda reading with some other writers, Chilean writers. I was there also during the Allende campaign in 1964, reading before 5,000 or 6,000 fishermen at a fishing village in southern Chile near Talcahuano. And then reading at the University of Concepcion, reading to the students near a waterfall. That was the kind of thing that Neruda enjoyed. He loved young people. He wanted them to live poetry with him. And I think he would have been very happy to see this America I was looking at, not the America of war and violence, but this young America related to poetry and to the significance of the Chilean tragedy. I think that we are going to witness some very important things. When, I don't know, in regard to what has happened in Chile. I believe that the back of the Chilean liberation movement is not broken by any means. I think the flame of resistance is going to grow. I think that we are going to witness a second, a third liberation of the Chilean people. I believe that Allende and Neruda did not die in vain. I think they, each in his own manner, died for what they believed, died In the case of Neruda, believing that poetry is action, poetry is life. And in the case of Allende, that the cause of justice, of social revolution in Chile, was the thing he wanted to do, and he couldn't see, he couldn't outlive the terrible beating that the Chilean people were taking at that moment. So, in reading the poems that we, Nina and I, are going to do today, I feel that we're talking to the American people with more than just words. We're talking of action. We have action in mind. I'm confident that the American people will respond, that they will be with us at the moment of truth.
Cool. So certainly a very positive and forward-thinking and not just liberatory, but I think one thing that's hard about legacies of all the negative legacies that have built this country is recognizing that there are so many people that challenge those legacies. So I think that's a piece that the Freedom Archives does well to uplift that, so that people know that despite the larger role that the United States has played in the destruction of this world, that in fact there is always resistance and hopefully a better tomorrow that we all can participate in. The example that I just played was an example of some of the audio clips that we have, but we also have other things. And so I know I was asked to talk a little bit about South Bay history, I know I was asked to relate this presentation to things that were happening in the South Bay, which I'm gonna blow through in terms of my time, but just to visually show that we have a lot of things, not just from kind of San Francisco and Oakland, and not also just nationally and internationally, but things from here as well. And so Seize the Time was a periodical that was produced in Mountain View. Here's some on the left. This is an article taken from the Movement newspaper, which basically was kind of like a social movement, what's happening in the world, that was produced throughout the 70s, and then the Black Panther Party newspaper on the right, where they're talking about a branch of the party in East Palo Alto. So for the last couple minutes I have, and I'll go quickly without taking away too many things, but I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the questions that were posed to us in terms of engaging. And so I think remembering and telling our stories passes down the legacy of resistance, but it's not just remembering and telling the stories, it's also what we draw from these stories. So how are these stories helping us unlearn? How are they helping us build power and organizing to changing the material conditions we live in? And again, that's some of the work that we try to conduct in the Freedom Archives. So not simply just preserving or telling, but also, as Alegria was saying, how can this create action? So communities, we know that communities are documenting their resistance and their stories in a million different ways and not being prompted at all to do so by institutions or archives or anyone. They're just doing it on their own. So I think part of the role that we play, or where we come in, is, are these narratives being preserved and are they accessible to the people who need them, right? They're being recorded either way, but do people know about them outside of the small scope that they may be being documented in? And so that's one of the places where community archives can help to support and build and maintain strong communities. In terms of ethical challenges, some that I'll very quickly raise. So who's leading the documentation and for what purpose? So we really, we're grounded in the community. People who are founders are still on our board. People who, Fernando Alegria's son is one of our technical advisors. The woman he mentioned in the clip, Nina, was one of the founders. And so it's really all a community. And so are people with access to resources making the decisions, or are people who are actually embedded in movements and community efforts making decisions? Accessibility, how easily can the community engage the materials? So you don't need an ID to engage the Freedom Archive stuff. You don't need to have any kind of special affiliation one way or the other. It's open to anyone. And then how is documentation empowering people and providing them with resources to address their needs? So again, preservation for the sake of preservation is fine. Of course, things should be preserved. And also, if there's not a larger point, then what is the point? And so in terms of ideas to consider for those wanting to support, obviously you can of course support the Freedom Archives by making a financial donation. We also are not supported by a government institution or, we're basically, donations are the vast majority of the support we get. So of course, if you would like to donate, please do. You can do so on our website. But in a larger sense, beyond kind of the financial sense, how do you support these efforts, right? So is the support actually speaking to transforming power relations or material conditions that communities live in? And who's setting the goals and the terrains of the engagement when one tries to support? So these are just some things that one can think of. Just to kind of end very abruptly, or not abruptly, but quickly, so we can have time for question and answer. I want to thank all of you for listening. Also, this is, the Freedom Archives is a community effort, so there's 2 people in the audience, a board member and another staff member. Obviously, they didn't say anything today, but without their energy and support, this would not be possible. So thank you to them, and appreciate all y'all time and listening.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. I have more of a comment based on Nathaniel's remarks. I grew up in Berkeley, so I'm fascinated that you're there. I went to Berkeley High, and many of the things that I'm sure are documented in your archive are things I remember. And I'm fascinated by the fact that you have the archive and you're right next to the University of California at Berkeley, because I used to work at the Bancroft. But mainly, my reflections from your comments are that I do oral history, and I just related so much to what you said about the underground nature of what can happen with archival materials and stories and narratives, and what the point is if they're not found. And so much of the work I do, I would like to disseminate and share more so that the struggles and challenges and lessons of the people who I've interviewed can be shared for the benefit of others. And that's something I would love to continue the conversation with you about at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you all. Terrific panel. A couple questions. I'll throw both of them out right now. First, for Jim, one thing I'm very curious about. You talked about how before U.S. federal policy, sort of changed the trajectory of Native American culture. There was the notion of 2 spirits. And I'm wondering, was all of that culture related to that lost, or were you able to find when you were, for instance, when you were creating your powwow, were you able to find out what was done along those lines in the past? Was there anything preserved, or did you have to completely recreate it? I just wonder if that's something that you think was just probably lost in your culture. And then I wanted to ask, actually, you and Micah, do you have like a physical collection as well, where some kind of repository where things are, or do you just have interviews and tapes, or maybe things online, or is it just that if you have an event, then people can see them? Thank you.
So to answer your question, yeah, we did find through some research that, and it's funny because I brought a visual. It's just a picture, but it's every single name that we could find of the tribe that called their Two-Spirit, what they called their Two-Spirit person. And even my own tribe was in there. Even the Dakotas people were in there as a Winkte. Winkte is the name up there, which is the name of the Two-Spirit. So we did find that they did have a role in those societies back then, prior to colonization. And in fact, their roles were quite prominent, in that sometimes they would name people, they give them, honorary birth names, they would give them names. Sometimes they would go for advice, sometimes they would go for blessings, and it was really kind of interesting. They had a very big role in other tribes as well.
And with regard to the question about where you're storing your materials,
yes.
We don't. We don't actually have any materials to store. I mean, we have a collection of pamphlets and buttons and stuff that we still have. We gave small samples, of course, as I said earlier, to the GLBT Historical Society. So they have it's part of their permanent collection. You know, it included a lot of posters that we had done over the years, pamphlets that we had done with collaboration with other nonprofits, especially health and mental health nonprofits as well, and textiles and artwork we had given them. So it's part of their collection now.
Micah?
So I have a Google Drive in which I store over 300 articles, or I composited things, and I have rules for how you make a biography for somebody. It's got to be documented well by some kind of journalism that's respectable, and it has to demonstrate that the person, why they're historically significant, and then that they identify as part of the African diaspora, and that they identify as part of the LGBTQ or sexual gender minority community. And those things have to be together in either an article or two that can be put together to be demonstrated for why that person's in that domain of the archive that I maintain in a Google Drive. And I print them out. Hopefully I don't have to reprint every time, so the ones that aren't taken at the end of the event, I use them again for subsequent years. Save paper.
We've got 1 minute left, so perhaps one more question or comment.
Hi, I want to say thank you again as well for all of your presentations. My question is for Micah. I guess for those of us from local, history organizations that are doing these like programs and events to share local history. I was really inspired by your Generations event and like the care you took to put all these different aspects into it to make the community feel welcome. And you mentioned the importance of evaluation, and for those of us doing these events, we think they're important. We see the impact that they have when people are at our events, but then we need to demonstrate the impact of those events for those outside, like for funding and et cetera. And so you had all these great qualitative examples, and so I wanted to ask if you have any recommendations or challenges, or kind of how did you obtain those qualitative, like do you distribute surveys, or I know you already engendered like so much goodwill just putting on this great event, and so I think that's probably part of the the steps of getting people to give you feedback, but I wonder if you can say any more about that evaluation aspect.
Incentivize it. So essentially, the biggest raffle prize at the end of the night happens after people turn in their evaluation, and you get an evaluation. You get a raffle ticket for turning in an evaluation, and so that usually works pretty well. Our response rate was usually 50% or greater of our, and we would have around 200, between 200 and 400 people attend every year. So that's a lot of data, and people are really happy to do that because they know that that data is going to help fund the event in future years too.
We are at time, so I want to thank everyone here who has come today to listen, and I want to thank our speakers, Jim and Nathaniel and Micah. Those were great presentations. Thank you, everyone.